no fallen angels and no hell, in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4. Before we get to discuss the wording of that passage, we must go back to an event recounted in Numbers chapter 16 concerning 3 men in rebellion. Their names were Korah, Dathan and Abiram. They challenged with jealousy the authority of Moses. Korah wanted a share in the Levite priesthood, and the 3 men grumbled that Moses had only brought them out of Egypt, they said, to kill us off in the wilderness. In other words, they had no faith that the Lord their God would be providing for them in the wilderness. Moses was extremely angry, and he put them to the test with censers to burn incense, and he isolated them at their tents with 250 other grumblers. And Moses said to the assembly, "If Yahweh does a new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them down with all that they possess, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have provoked Yahweh." And for their rebellion, the ground did open its mouth and swallow them down. So Numbers chapter 16 verses 31 to 35 reads like this. "And it came about, as he," that is Moses, "made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground underneath them split apart, and the ground opened its mouth and swallowed them down, and their houses, and all the men of Korah, and all their property. And down they sank, they and all they possessed, alive into the pit, and the ground closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. And all Israel who were around them fled at the cry of them, for they said, in case the ground might swallow us down. And fire from Yahweh broke out, and it consumed the 250 men who offered incense." Now the verb swallowed down in verses 30 and 32 of that passage is the Hebrew word barlor, Strong's Online Concordance reference H114. And if you don't know what I mean by that, I suggest you type in the words into a search engine, Strong's, strong apostrophe S, new word, H, the letter H, 1104, and you will find a link to the Blue Letter Bible, which is wonderful, a free online lexicon and concordance giving you all meanings by various lexicographers, and a concordance of all the words' uses, and it will tell you how to transliterate the word, how to pronounce it, and exactly what it looks like in its Hebrew form. So this same event is also recounted in Psalm 106 verse 17. "The ground opened and swallowed down Dathan, and it overwhelmed the company of Abiram." So naming Dathan and implying his brother Abiram and implying Korah. The same Hebrew verb, barlor, is used for swallowed down that is used in Numbers 16, 30 and 32. And the same verb is used in the prophet Jonah in chapter 1 verse 17, "And Yahweh provided a large fish to swallow Jonah." Again, Strong's H1104. Now, going to the New Testament, the apostle Judah, who's generally known as Jude, but should be known as Judah, his Israelite heritage, and the same with the letter James, it should be Jacob. So we've got letters in the New Testament from Jacob and Judah. Let's have those names, please. Anyway, the apostle Judah also refers to that event. They suffered destruction by the rebellion of Korah, Jude verse 11. So naming Korah. Now we come to Peter's passage, 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4. Peter's letter is closely related to the letter of Jude and refers to it. Elohim did not spare sinning messengers, but holding them down in chains of darkness, consigned them, being swallowed underground, having been reserved for judgment. These rebels for whom the ground opened and swallowed them down are referred to as sinning messengers. The word for messengers is angelos, Strong's G32. Now, if you type that into Google, G32, it will take you to the New Testament words, G for Greek, and it will give you how to write the Greek word, how to transliterate it, how to pronounce it, what various lexicographers say it means, and all its occurrences. And now sometimes this word angelos, obviously where we get angel from, refers to angels, the angels in heaven who are there now. But sometimes it refers to men, such as in Matthew 11:10, I send my messenger before your face. And in 1 Corinthians 11:10, the passage about the ladies wearing head covering so as not to distract the messengers. It's not to distract angels. Christians don't have meetings with angels hanging around, lusting after the women. When has that happened? And there are several other passages where angelos means men, messengers, human messengers. At the end of Hebrews, some have entertained messengers unawares, not knowing who they were. And Korah, Dathan and Abiram were certainly not angels, anything but, as we have seen. They were rebels. They did not believe in the provision of God. They did not believe in the authority, the divine authority of the prophet Moses. So they were men of the flesh. Now, where that passage reads, holding them down in chains of darkness, consigned them, being swallowed underground, The Greek verb being swallowed underground is tartaru. This is a verb, Strong's G5020. When you go onto that blue letter Bible, you get this American voice, rather nice, who gives you these pronunciations, and you'll hear. You click on the little microphone icon, and there's a pause, and then you'll hear Strong's G5020, tartaru. Now this tartaru is the equivalent of the Hebrew bachlor. At number 16, verse 30 and 32, and Psalm 106, verse 17, and the same one used in Jonah 1, verse 17. Now in 2 Peter 2:4, as for the phrase chains of darkness, this is a metaphor. These are not real chains. People underground in the grave do not need to be chained up. Now certainly we read in the book of Acts that Peter was chained in jail. Yes, and the angel set him free from his chains. But when people are underground in the grave, they don't need to be chained up, because they just disintegrate into bones. 1 Peter 3:19 speaks of spirits that are put for men in captivity. So this is the captivity of the grave, death. Death is a captivity, and it's poetical language. And Jude 6, messengers who did not keep to their own original position, but having deserted their habitation, for judgment of a terrible day, he has kept in perpetual chains under darkness. These chains are a metaphor. So when Hosea, Paul citing him, where, O grave, is your victory? This is the victory over these metaphorical chains, the chains of death. In the Septuagint, that is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, where it translates Numbers chapter 16 concerning the men who were swallowed underground, it could have used this Greek verb, tartaru. It didn't, as a matter of fact. It used katapino, Strong's G2666. But tartaru would have been just as appropriate. However, let's look at what some of the other versions have done to this passage. So we know that it's about Korah, Dathan and Abiram, and that they were swallowed into a pit, and there they remain until resurrection and judgment. Darkness. That where is it dark? In the grave there's no light. I have here the Concordant Literal New Testament. This is how it translates the passage. I just lost my place there, excuse me, I had it marked ready. For if God spares not sinning messengers, right, messengers, this translation gets it right, but thrusting them into the gloomy caverns of Tartarus. Oh my goodness, what a paraphrase. Thrusting them into the gloomy caverns of Tartarus. Now Tartarus is from Greek mythology. Yes, okay, Tartaru is obviously related to it, but biblical Greek does not mean the same as classical Greek. For example, the noun Hades in the New Testament means grave. It's the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew Sheol, which means grave, the place of the dead. The patriarchs were buried and rested with their fathers in Sheol, and Hades means the same thing. But in Luke chapter 16, when Jesus is mocking the Hellenistic concept of Hades, which you can read in the Greek poet Homer, Jesus uses the word Hades. There he's referring to the classical use of it, and describes these impossible this impossible event of a man in Hades waving to a man in Abraham's bosom. No such phrase in the Old Testament. Abraham's bosom, that's myth. And Jesus mocks this, and in the end he says talks about believing the prophets. If somebody was sent to them from the dead, they would not believe, but believe the prophets. And that mythological Abraham's bosom and waving to each other across great chasms and yearning for some water on the tip of his tongue, calling for someone to pass him some water from Abraham's bosom. I mean, it's utter nonsense. And Jesus mocks it. How ironic that some people take it as doctrine. But that's what the Concordant Literal Version does to that passage. Now, there are many good things I can say about the Concordant Literal Version. It's much better than the church system Bibles. Now, the New King James, again, I had that marked up, but they turn the page. Here we are. the New King James, 2 Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness. And the Old King James says something very similar. Cast them down to hell. Well, the passage is about Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Numbers chapter 16 doesn't talk about them going off into any eternal punishment in fires of hell. It just says that they fell into this pit and the ground closed over them. And that is where they are now. It's nothing to do with hell. Right, the New International Version. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, angels, Korah, Dathan and Abiram were not angels, but sent them to hell, putting them into gloomy dungeons to be held for judgment. So this gives the concept of some fallen angels in hell, but also in gloomy dungeons, and where they're held for judgment. Well, number 16 does not say anything about gloomy dungeons, and they're not angels, and they're not sent to hell. And don't let anybody tell me that hell doesn't mean a place of eternal punishment. Some people try and justify it and say hell is the grave. Well, it's not. It is not the grave. We all know what hell means. And in Matthew 5, and Jesus talks about calling your brother a fool, you're liable to the fire of the valley of Hinnom. That's not the grave. The valley of Hinnom is not the grave. And there's no fire in the grave. I have another New Testament here, the emphatic diaglott. This is a 19th century translation. And I must say, again, there are some very good things I can say about this. It's the only translation I've come across that gets right Philippians 1:23, translating the preposition ek as out of rather than between. Anyhow, very small writing in this edition. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, oh dear, angels with a capital A, but having confined them in Tartarus with chains of thick darkness, delivered them over into custody for judgment. Tartarus. So again, imposing mythology. So the King James translators couldn't help themselves. I didn't actually read the Old King James, but it's similar to the New King James. Angels and hell. The King James translators were clearly not men of the Spirit. You can easily find that out. They were sickly crawlers to royalty. Just read the preface to the King James Bible, then you'll see. And then if you don't believe, read Power and Glory, The Making of the King James Bible by Adam Nicholson. He's a contemporary writer. He writes non-fiction. He's written about the Shant Islands in Scotland, which he owned before he gave them to his son. He's written about the Greek poet Homer. He's written about seagulls. Wonderful book about seagulls. He's not a believer. He's an evolutionist. And he wrote this book, Power and Glory, about the King James Bible. And it's unbiased. He is in some admiration of the Bible, because the King James Bible, because he's not a believer and doesn't know what the teachings are, but he's honest. He's a man of integrity and a man of incredible writing powers. His power of narrative is just absolutely marvellous. I'm in great awe of his power of narrative. He'll tell you what these translators were like. The chairman of the translators, Lancelot Andrews, was a persecutor of Christians, an inquisitor, and others with him, Banton and Thomas Sparks. I hope he's not one of my forebears. But where did this injection of mythology come into the reading of these passages? It's been imposed. I put it to you, it's been imposed by translators and by unaware expositors and preachers. And so, for example, fallen angels, there's nowhere in the Bible that talks about angels sinning, actually. Oh, you say, what about Genesis chapter 6? Well, let's start with the New Testament. If you read the phrase sons of God in the New Testament, you know that that's talking about believers. So why, when you read sons of God in Genesis 6, do you think that's talking about angels? Particularly fallen angels. Sons of God are redeemed men, not fallen men, not fallen angels. And there's also the phrase in the prophet Hosea, sons of the living God. Well, that's very similar, and it's about redemption, the new covenant. The house of Israel having been divorced and becoming lo ami, not my people. But under the new covenant, they will be called my people, ami in the Hebrew, and sons of the living God, believers, redeemed men. There's one other place in the Old Testament where you can read, two other places in the Old Testament where you can read sons of God. In the prophet Job, in Job chapter 1, I think it's verse 6, and chapter 2, I think it's verse 6. Somebody coming from among the sons of God. Why say that that refers to fallen angels? Why? Sons of God are redeemed men. This adversary, who is Satan, not Satan with a capital S, but an enemy of Job, again, like Korah, an envious man, a jealous man, jealous of Job. He's coming from the sons of God, Beni Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, coming from the assembly of believers. Now, the other place in the Old Testament where it refers to sons of God is in Job 38 verse 7, which talks about the creation and the sons of the morning and rejoicing, and the sons of Elohim, or the sons of God, singing and rejoicing. Well, this is poetry now. The stars, I must turn to it and get the exact words for you. I don't like paraphrasing. Excuse me a moment. Job 38. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of Elohim shouted for joy. The morning stars sang together. Stars. And all the sons of Elohim shouted for joy. Creations of Elohim. Now this is called a parallelism. That's how Hebrew poetry works. It gives it to you once in certain words, then it gives it to you again in similar words. Two expressions meaning one thing. So the morning stars sang, the sons of Elohim shouted. And it's personification, because they didn't really sing, did they? Stars don't really sing. The morning stars were not holding song sheets and singing. Stars do not sing. And all the sons of Elohim shouted. So the morning stars singing, that should tell you straight away we're talking about poetical language, metaphor, personification. And the second line, the sons of Elohim shouted for joy. These are stars. These are not angels. It does not mean angels any more than the morning stars means angels. So there is 2 Peter 2:4 for you. The story of Korah and Dathan and Abiram, and the passage in 2 Peter chapter 2 is talking about other human rebels. Sodom and Gomorrah in the time of Noah, human rebels. And so are they human rebels at 2 Peter 2 chapter 4, sinning messengers. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon.